Good evening, Rangers. Welcome to Crotoni Entertainment. I'm Chris, and if it's Monday, it's Morphin time. As we get into Morphin Monday, we're going to jump right in and tackle Primator. We're going to get started right away because it's going to be a little bit of a longer video. So let's grab our Citadel color, contrast, Apothecary white, and start slathering our Primator with this to get our white cloth here. So we're just going to pick this up. We're just going to run it all over the fur areas. We don't care if it gets over the belly or anything that's not covered by fur. It doesn't matter. As we've talked about in the past, this contrast paint is going to flow into the deepest recesses. It's going to leave the top parts a little lighter, and we're just going to be able to go with it. We prime this as usual with Rustoleum 2X Perfect Gray Flat Spray Primer. It absorbs the contrast really well, and it's a nice light gray to work off of for any colors we don't do with contrast. But as we go through Primator here, we're going to discover that I ended up doing most of it with contrast. The colors turned out real good. Well, that was terrible grammar, but the colors turned out to be something I really liked, so I moved forward with it, and I just kind of let it go. So we'll get all this Apothecary white on here. We'll step away for a second. We're going to go ahead and let that dry. And when it's fully dry, it's going to look something like this. So we're going to see that gray in there. We're going to see the white on the top, but we want a little whiter. So we're going to grab our Vallejo Game Color Dead White. We're going to dry brush this over. If you're not really familiar with dry brushing technique, it's very basic. Most of you probably know it. You take a broader tipped brush. You see mine's pretty wide and flat here. You put a little bit of the paint on it. You wipe most of it off on a paper towel or on your palette or wherever it is you're wiping your paints off of. And then as you run it over the model fairly quickly, it's only going to catch to the highest areas. So that inside is still going to stay with that darker color, and we're just going to lighten up the fur a little bit as we go ahead and move forward into the next color. Now, one thing we're going to do is keep that dead white on hand pretty regularly. We're going to come back to it a lot. Now we're going to jump into another Citadel contrast paint. It's whatever this blue is. I will try to look it up and put that in the description of the video. I don't remember the name of it. I actually bought it off of the shade. It didn't have a label in the shop, so I'll look up what the color that is and put that in the description. But we're going to use this Citadel contrast, and we're going to put this in all of the fleshy areas of Primator. He's got kind of these weird hump areas on his arms and his legs. His feet are blue, his whole belly, chest area, and a good chunk of his face and ears are blue. So we're just going to focus on all those areas with this contrast paint. I did mix it with a little bit of contrast medium to let it flow a little better, because this particular blue, while it is a gorgeous final color, it does like to kind of streak a bit if you don't thin it down at all. So we thin it down a little bit. We're going to try to make it look as good as possible. So we continue on, get the hands, get the chest, get the belly, get kind of a weird lighting effect there a second ago. I apologize for that. I'm not sure what happened there. And otherwise, we're just going to paint this all up. It's just going to take us a second. Primator he's a fun villain. Most distinctive thing I remember about Primator is we watched through Power Rangers Season 1 with my 6-year-old, and they use a Primator episode, and then, I don't know, like 20 episodes later, he shows back up again, and the exact same footage is used, but they slightly change the dialogue, pretending like it's a new monster. It's very bizarre. But once we finish up the face, we're kind of ready to move on. We'll let that dry. Get a look at it here. It actually looks pretty good, and we'll pull out that white that I said we were going to bring up a couple of times because this weird jester collar that he wears is actually white. I thought about going off the reservation here and not doing a white collar, doing a kind of multicolored to represent his ability to transform. But then ultimately I decided let's stick with the traditional. What's nice is we're going to get some nice definition between this white and the white of the fur, because the fur was done with the contrast paint. And it was done with a dry brush, so the white didn't grab on as thickly as we're doing it on this collar. So we're still going to get a fine definition with this collar here. And this part's real easy, because it's got that nice defined groove line between the trim of the collar and the body of it itself. So we just kind of follow that line. It gives us a nice crisp highlight. It's real easy to do. So now it's time to pull out our Citadel Gray Seer. You should have plenty of this. We've been using it in pretty much every video. So if you're painting these like I'm painting them, you're going to have plenty of this floating around, and life is going to be good. We're just going to bring this out, and we're going to pick out a couple of areas that we want to ultimately be white. And looking at some photos of the Primator, his toenails or toe claws or whatever you're going to call them on a gorilla creature, those are actually going to be white. So we're going to paint this with the Gray Seer. Ultimately, when we're done, the only Gray Seer you're going to see is the area really close to the base of his toe. The rest is going to be white. But we're also going to go ahead and put this on his teeth as well, because his teeth and the inside of the mouth, we're going to hit that as well. And getting that inside of his mouth is going to let us use contrast on it later. So now we're going to pull out our Citadel contrast Blood Angels Red while we have the camera lined up to look like a complete amateur at this. But, you know, we are still an amateur, so it is what it is. So I apologize for that in the corner there. But this Blood Angels Red is going to go ahead and be used on his cheek areas here. It's going to provide a wonderful splash of color to a miniature that otherwise doesn't have a tremendous amount to it. I mean, I know blue and white are not the same color, but they tend to be cooler colors, and a nice burst of brightness that the red is costume accurate and is going to look pretty cool on this guy, and very, very simple. And then the next thing we're going to do is going to work on his gold helmet. We're going to start with that with Citadel Layer Stormhost Silver. I like to do a lot of golds these days this way. The golds we use for the Zeo Rangers and whatnot are fine, but this particular gold is going to be a really simple one, and we're just going to kind of do this on what we're going to call his Jingle Bells, I guess. And we're going to put this all over his helmet. The silver paint I do right out of the pot usually. I've never had a tremendous amount of luck with thinning silver paints. I know there are thinners you can get there that are good for it, but the metallic paints actually are made with bits of metal is my understanding in them. And the water tends to separate the paint a lot more, and it just doesn't flow as well. It doesn't look as good if you thin it with water. And I just don't have the right type of thinner to move forward there. And it's not something that super concerns me. So we'll get all that on there. And now Primator is dry again. We're ready to move forward one more time. So the next thing we're going to jump into on this guy is, let's get him up nice and close here. Next thing we're going to jump into is these teeth in the inside of his mouth. So you can see I used actually a little Citadel Contrast Shyish purple inside his mouth. And again, we're going back to that dead white that we've talked about before. I kind of said keep it on standby. We're going to just pick out the individual teeth. It doesn't have to be perfect, just nice little lines where his teeth kind of should be, and it'll look pretty good. We're also going to do this white over the toenails. As you see, we're going to cover most of the toenail / claw. Like I mentioned earlier, the only thing we're leaving really gray is the gray seer underneath, but it's going to stand out when we color this base. We've also got our Citadel Mephiston Red. I apologize for the speed of that. I'll put it in the description. We're going to be using this to paint his eyeballs. So we're going to get a nice thin brush. We're going to very, very carefully get in there on his eyes. It's not a fun thing to do, but it's doable. Now let's get that gold going. We need our Citadel Contrast Nazdreg Yellow. The gold's not going to come out on this miniature as well as I wanted. My Nazdreg Yellow is getting a little bit a little bit low, so the pigmentation is fairly high inside of it. That led to ultimately a darker color than I wanted to, but if your bottle is fresher than mine is, you shouldn't have that concern. But basically all I'm doing is I'm dipping my brush in the Nazdreg Yellow and I'm going over the silver with it. It's going to tint the silver a nice gold color. It's going to be a very unique gold, and I'm a big fan of the ultimate look of it. I'm also a fan of how easy it is to do, especially for miniatures like this, which I said 100 times are not display miniatures. These are simple paint jobs that'll make the game look good. After all, I do have a 6-year-old regularly playing this game. I'm not going to put Masterworks on the table because he's just going to beat him up and not appreciate it. We're going to rub this all over the helmet. We're going to do our best to go back over certain areas to minimize streak lines. Again, if you have a newer bottle than I do, streak lines are going to be less of an issue. Mine, it's getting so low, the pigment is so clumpy, and we'll drop the model there because it's one of my videos, and I think in the last 4 or 5, I've dropped the model every single time. But anyway, we're going to get this all gold, try to get rid of the streak marks. Since it's an older bottle, I'm probably getting more streaks than you are, but it still looks pretty decent overall. We can still touch it up a little bit further with another really, really simple-looking technique, though. So we're going to jump right into that with our Citadel Layer Liberator Gold. This is only going to be done as a dry brush, and I only really hit the helmet with this. So again, going to take a little bit of a broader bristle brush. We're going to put a little bit of paint on it. I'm going to rub most of the paint off, and we're just going to work it over the helmet. There's not a lot of super high definition to grab on with the helmet, but these smooth areas will still pick up some of that paint, and it'll give a little bit of definition to the helmet. But more importantly, and the reason I did this is to hide those streak lines that were being created by my low Nazdreg Yellow. You may not have these streak lines, and if you don't, you can probably skip this step, but I think it did a lot of salvation for the helmet on mine, so you may want to move forward it. So we're practically done here. We're going to move into ultimately our last steps of Primator, which are all about the Abaddon Black. You know where this is going to go. It's going to go on the base. It's going to go on the top of the base. It's going to go on the rim. I'm also going to go ahead and put it on his nose. This is really the only off-the-reservation point I did. The Primator costume from the show is mostly a blue face, but I felt like his face was getting a little lost without just another accent or another little pop of color in there, or in the case of black, an absence of color. So I decided to go ahead and do his nose black. Kind of makes him look like he has a dog face, but it works out ultimately, especially from tabletop level. So as per usual, we're going to put a lot of water on this brush as we spread the black paint on it. I like it to be really, really watery, almost an ink consistency when I go over the base, because that's going to prevent brush lines on this larger area. And then when it dries, I can do a second layer of it. I often do off camera, just do a second layer with a lot of water to make it nice and really smooth. Now, the paint I'm going to do on the rim, I do dry the brush a little bit. There's still some water on the brush when I dip it in the black, but not as much as on the top of the base, because I don't want this to be water. It will just run off and leave streaks on a vertical surface. But anyway, we're wrapping up. This is Primator. Thank you for joining us for Miniatures Monday. Please click like and subscribe to see more videos. We have one coming out every single Monday. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this technique helps you paint your Primator, and really appreciate you watching the video. Thank you for watching Crotone Entertainment, and we will see you all next week.